must mean I can actually begin for the evening, what? Well, everything I've heard about and read about regarding the scientific romances of Mr. Herbert George Wells, if this farrago has been anything to go by, then it is vastly overrated, sir. Well, vastly overrated. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name is George Edward Challenger. Now, you may remember my involvement in that trifling affair regarding the incident of the pterodactyl. As far as I'm aware, is still swooping high and far above the metropolitan suburbs of London. Artesian Wells. Artesian Wells. Now, bores may be many things. They may be crushing bores. They may be tedious bores. They may be technological bores. But artesian wells this evening, ladies and gentlemen, they are the bores that I mean to discuss with you. I had need of an artesian well. Now, of course, I am a man of science. I pride myself on never having encountered a man whose intellect is comparable to mine. However, there is a certain thing to be said, is there not? For specialism, my specialism is a certain omniscience. But I needed a man who specialized in artesian wells. Artesian wells, boys! Peerless Jones, an American by birth, still, we won't hold that against him, will we? Peerless Jones had been recommended to me by that young fella, Edward Malone, journalist. Now, ordinarily, I cannot abide a journalist, but then Mr. Malone, not much of a journalist, so he was quite all right. What? Peerless Jones had been recommended to me by Mr. Edward Malone, and so it was that day, toward the end of July, that I invited Mr. Peerless Jones here to my suite of rooms at Enmore Gardens in Her Majesty's own capital of London. You really must visit it sometime, you really must. Now, I would imagine Mr. Peerless Jones's expression was one of yours, sir, and yours, madam. What? Ashton, as already I've sent young fellow Malad out upon his ear. No, this time Norton had sent his own son with a view to expecting me, Professor George Edward Challenger, to pay his bill. Trifling amount of £42,000. I pay bills when I want and how I want, and I will not be hoodwinked and browbeaten into dancing to another piper's tune. Well, and so it was Peerless Jones had come to pay me a visit that day, quaking in his boots. I happen to have read a monograph of his that he had written upon the Sinai Peninsula. Any of you read it? Well, go on, that wasn't a rhetorical question, what? No, Sinai Peninsula, adequate, I thought, if a trifle dull. You may be aware, and I happen to own vast swathes of land near Hengist Down. You know it? Chalk cliffs. Wonderful, madam. You may recollect the Hengist Down mystery all over the newspapers, particularly the Gazette, some years ago. And of course, I happen to have inherited a vast amount of money by Betterton, the rubber millionaire. Well, of course, all that money and still rubber did not bounce back from death, did he? What? Oh! He left me all this money, his vast estate. As long as I could give him my word, I would use the money for scientific pursuits. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I had bought Hengist Down, a vast tract of land, and for years I had had that same swathe of land excavated. There was a gully that had used to run through the middle of that land at the time Mr. Peerless Jones, the American, had come to visit me at Enmore Gardens. I had that vast tract of land, barbed wired off to the hoi polloi journalists? Well, oh my God, dogs had had their fill of journalists endeavoring to obtain the scoop of the century. Oh, they'd had their taste of journalists, ladies and gentlemen, my German shepherds, and they'd be worth their weight in gold. Apropos, the trouser seats of journalists. So, Mr. Peerless Jones had come to me that day. I said to him, something apropos my theories pertaining to the world. Now, go on, I say to you now, what I said to Mr. Peerless Jones that morning here in Enmore Gardens. Picture, if you will, sea urchin, tumbling through the ocean main, life in a briny wave. What? Oh. Well, many times I've considered the planet Earth, the sea urchin, comparable in so many ways. Like the Earth, the sea urchin is practically spherical, although flattened on either pole. But the similarities do not end there. You may imagine, how does the sea urchin obtain its nourishment? Simple. It tumbles and cascades through the ocean wave, at the same time deriving all the nutrients it desires from the water surrounding it, draws them down its pipes, and so into its inner belly. The sea urchin, not dissimilar to the Earth. Well, don't you understand just the way the sea urchin tumbles through the ocean? So the planet Earth tumbles through the depths of outer space, a swathe of the cosmos, deriving its nutrients, its nourishment from the cosmic trails it blazes along with Venus and Mars and Uranus. Think, ladies and gentlemen, think! And then again, as I said to Peerless Jones, imagine, if you will, the similarities between the sea urchin and planet Earth do not end there. Imagine, if you will, the sea urchin finds itself host to any amount of minutiae, a simulacrum scuttling over its crustacean shell. Well, do you think it's any more aware of those than Mother Earth is aware of we? Well, we are nothing, a human race, nothing more than a human fungus. Fungus, what? Akin to barnacles. Barnacles that adhere to the prow of a mighty seagoing vessel as it cuts its way through the ocean wave. Of course, imagine, if you will, ladies and gentlemen, what if a mosquito... what if a mosquito desired to make its presence known to the sea urchin? What should it do, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, don't think, good heavens, you pull such an awful face, madam. What should the mosquito do? It would extend its proboscis and drive it deep through the outer shell of the sea urchin, straight into the fleshy underbelly. And in that way, ladies and gentlemen, I, George Edward Challenger, I would make Mother Earth aware that of all the millions and billions of human beings scurrying hither and thither like so many ants about its surface, there was at least one individual, I, the supreme Professor Challenger, who was determined to raise himself erect, to stick his head over the parapet, and to say, I, Mother Earth, I, Professor Challenger, stand unbowed before you. I announce my presence. All of this, Peerless Jones listened with a look of absolute bewilderment upon his face. Yes, sir, a look rather like you. Now, please close your mouth when you're endeavoring to think. Yes, that's right, and you also, madam. That is why I had desire to bring Mr. Jones with me, his specialism, artesian wells. I said to him that day at Enmore Gardens, I desired him to construct for me an artesian drill for no less than 100 feet in length. Furthermore, it would be my desire for him to drill the tip of that bore no less than 40 feet into the surface of the earth. Though, of course, this was no mere pit. To the very center of the planet. Consider, if you will, the thickness of the Earth's crust, some 14,442 yards, approximately 8 miles thick. Well, they said it could not be done, but I, George Edward Challenger, was determined to prove them wrong, and so I'd already done so, and already burrowed and drilled my way. My mighty intellect, my cerebral force, twinned with all of the explosive devices, all of the legerdemain that my contractors could bring to mind. Now, however, now with the introduction of Peerless Jones, the artesian expert, now it was the time for the thinker to step aside, and for the man of action, Mr. Peerless Jones, to enter the fray. Do you accept? What? Well, what little could he do? He raised his hand as if to raise an objection. I swatted him away like the mosquito I alluded to earlier, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, years and years had I invested the money that I had been given by the rubber millionaire Betterton. And now it was, some 2 days later, Peerless Jones, accompanied by a young Malone of the Gazette newspaper, arrived at my compound, Hengist Down. And they were met there by the foreman, rather a dour, melancholic individual. I understand he was a married man. We have little to be wondered at, what? But I remember my father saying to me once years ago, "You'll have to marry one day. George, my lad, you cannot stay happy forever." Now, I always believe young carefree bachelors ought to have a tax placed upon them. It is quite unfair to see young men going about so happily without some cloud darkening their sunlit vistas. What? Bardolph, the foreman, he met Peerless Jones and Edward Malone at Hengist Down that day. I was there to greet them, of course. Now, I was prepared to bestow upon them an honor that all of you right thinking ladies and gentlemen would have given your eye teeth for. That is, madam, if you had any teeth left to spare. What? Namely, to accompany me down the shaft in the lift, so we'd examine the state of play down 8 miles toward the Earth's crust. I was already attired. I was prepared. They were not. They were sent into the outhouse, and there they were made to disrobe and to dress again in suitable garb, India rubber shoes and the West. And then they came to me, and clambering into that lift, down into the Stygian depths we descended, down, some 14,442 yards, 8 miles, 14 elevators, ladies and gentlemen, one after the other. The temperature climbed through various strata of rocks, granite and carboniferous clay. Down and further down we descended, becoming rather warm, I imagine, as warm as you are used to, sir, each year when you deliver your accounts to your accountant. What? Yes, I thought so. And then we alighted. There, Mr. Jones looked rather ashen. In spite of the mighty heat that looked about him. You see there the rock walls surrounding us. How they were thick in some awful-looking, oily ooze, glistening in the darkness. And then the elevator itself had stopped some 20 to 30 feet above the tarpaulin-covered fleshy center of Mother Earth. That is where I wished Mr. Peerless Jones to drill his 100 feet long mechanical device. Electrically operated, of course, when the time came, just in case anything untoward should happen. There, Mr. Malone was quite bewildered and horrified and astounded and fascinated all at once. I invited him to place his hand upon the rocky wall. He could feel it beat and pulsate. Well, as I said to him, have I not impressed upon you already my belief that the earth, a living sentient being, look upon the wondrous English landscape, see the way the landscape contours, it rises and it dips. Is that really any different when you ask yourselves? The swell, the cessation, the inhalation, the exhalation of a living, breathing creature. See the moorland and the heath, the hairy hind of an animal. Volcanoes, nothing more than heat lumps. Heat lumps, I say. What? Mr. Malone turned to me. Professor Challenger, he said, may I say, if I have not said it before, you, sir, are a wonder to this age and to every age. I know, I said, and looking down upon this strange sight before him, beneath which we could see some eerie incandescent pink fluid ebb and flow, he said to me. It reminded him, like nothing so much as the hide of a shaven animal. An appropriate enough analogy, ladies and gentlemen. And so with that, he ascended 8 miles once more to the surface, back on the terra firma, back as we were, surrounded by that great horseshoe shape of debris, of iron towers, pumping and working away. 3 days later, Felix Jones and his man Peters arrived, beginning to bring their various paraphernalia, their machinery. 3 days and more as they took piece by piece of it down in the lift shaft. 3 days. I said to them, time is money. I'm here not for excuses, but for action. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, finally, scarce more than a fortnight after I had uttered those words, the day came when the great hangest down mystery was to be solved. Look at them there. No, don't look at me. Look over there. See the sightseers, the observant hoi polloi, ladies and gentlemen, flocking to the downs, camping out all night, fearful that they may miss something, or I meant to give them something they would never forget in a hurry. Ladies and gentlemen, the journalists over there, buzzing like so many blue bottles around a pile of, you will never mind all that. And then, of course, I was there, Professor Challenger, to welcome the VIPs there into the corned-off section. As I said to them, then I said, you know, there were no ladies present. Oh, no, do not any of you believe, ladies and gentlemen, this was on account of there being any indifference shown on the part of ladies, the fairer sex, where Professor Challenger is concerned. I mean to say, look at me, what is there not for a female to swoon at the sight of? No, I believe there has never been anything less than supreme cordiality where I and the fairer sex are concerned. I merely forbade women to be there at Hengist Down that day, lest anything untoward happen. But for all of that, if there were women here, I do not think they would have worn quite as a discomfited expression as I could see on some of the gentlemen there that day. Men of the press, journalists, I do not hesitate to say gentlemen. Well, Edward Malone was all right, but he wasn't much of a journalist. Many's the time, they had said, Professor Challenger, you have treated us with absolute disdain and derision. That is why I ensured the journalists would have pride of place overlooking the pit itself, gazing down into the Stygian depths of the great mine shaft at the very epicenter of the drama as it unfolded. Well, I could not do fairer than that, could I? Ladies and gentlemen, if as I feared something were to happen. They could not say, Professor Challenger, you have obtruded the voice of the press once more, and if something did not happen, well, they could not say, could they, that I had treated them unfairly, and so I betook myself all the way over there. No, don't look at me, over there, the electric button atop that table, whilst we see the young fellows, Edward Malone and Peerless Jones, suitably attired in their costumes of India rubber, surely something the likes of Mr. Rider Haggard would have written about, beginning their 8-mile-long descent to the center of the earth. Oh no, that is Mr. Azure there, and another tale for another time. What? You understand, ladies and gentlemen, I was not made privy of the experiences undertaken by Jones and Malone until after the event. Of course, they came scurrying back to terra firma, giving as frantic and as garbled an account as any of you. Therefore, I will endeavor to transcribe it into the bold statement of scientific fact. Well, down, down, down they went, 20 or 30 feet above the tarpaulin-covered sheet of the center of Mother Earth itself. Now, I had said to them, these beams were to be inserted into that niche, and that niche, they would act as a cradle, as it were, a cradle with a view to keeping the drill in place until I pressed the electronic button and sent the drill whirring into the fleshy tissue of the planet. And yet, even as they went down there, they were disconcerted to see the walls vibrate, the walls cascade, shiver, quiver, vibrate, as though Mother Earth knew what indeed was afoot, knew what I, Challenger the Supreme, had intended to usher her way. Imagine their horror, ladies and gentlemen, Peerless Jones and Edward Malone. They looked up. Oh, not at me, you fools, up there. See the way. Those beams are shuddering in the cradle. Don't you understand? Any moment the beam may be displaced. Down will plunge the drill. 40 feet of drill straight into the tissue of Mother Earth. Have you any idea what horrors may not ensue? Guided by nothing more than gravity, with all of my stratagems cast aside, what? And so they flung themselves back into the elevator lift, and all the way 14,442 yards, 8 miles of distance they traversed. 14 lifts, 14 different floors. Mr. Malone says to me, though it must have taken no longer than a few minutes, it seemed like hours. What? Out of one lift, slam the cage door, run, run, into the other lift, ascend, ascend. They had only been upon terra firma for a few seconds. They had managed to run but 30 paces or so when suddenly an amazing seismic convulsion took place. Knocked all of us off our feet, skittered across the green sward, and then, ladies and gentlemen, then, assaulting our ears, we heard a sound the likes of which humanity had never encountered before. The scream of Mother Earth, Mother Nature herself in revolt as the drill pierced her skin. Now, I am led to believe this seismic catastrophe was felt all over the globe. The volcanoes of Etna and Vesuvius ejected forth their lava. Such platonic indignation in the South Americas and Mexico way. Ladies and gentlemen, one after the other, each and every of those 14 lift shots, pooh, 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 ejected forth from the mine shaft, cascading across the vaulted heavens, traveling as far as the eye could see. I am going to believe one of these lifts landed in the sea by Worthing Pier. Another somewhere in the vicinity of Chichester. And then there followed the eruption of this fell substance, this thick, odoriferous substance, this tar-like miasmic hell, a geyser, jetting forth into the pale blue skies. Was it blood, perhaps? Or was it, as I'm inclined to think, nothing more than a secretion in a not dissimilar fashion to the way the skunks, you know skunks, don't you? The way skunks work with a view to keeping away invasive intruders. Of course, Professor Challenger, was left unscathed. It rained down upon the gentlemen of the press. What? Drenched the gentleman, and I remained supreme and victorious. Even as the scream of Mother Earth echoed and reverberated all the way across the English Channel, even as all the bystanders and observers picked themselves off, dusted themselves down, and once more regained their equilibrium. There I stood, high atop my grassy hillock. There was silence. Then, ladies and gentlemen, oh, then, a wonderful recollection, a marvelous memory, a joyous reminiscence. Then these hundreds of people broke out spontaneously into applause, and cheering, they saluted I, George Edward Challenger, the Supreme, George Edward Challenger, the valorous, the incontrovertible. Many people, ladies and gentlemen, many people make it their lifetime's ambition to set the world talking. But he was allotted to I, Professor Challenger, and I alone, to set the world screaming. Blasting nuisances, telephone devices. Tinkle, tinkle, ring-a-ling-a-ling, I'm an important man, a busy man, a man of supreme intellect. I would not expect any of you to understand that I was here that day, within my suite of rooms. Little use my expecting the operator to give me anything by way of an apology, what? No! Then, as if my morning were not wasted anymore, I was encroached upon by young Malone from the Gazette. What is it, young sir? I said. It transpired, ladies and gentlemen. It transpired. Young Mr. Malone from the Gazette, at the behest of his editor, Mr. McCall, desired us to travel that same day to the north of the city of London to make the acquaintance of the Latvian inventor, Mr. Theodore Nemore. According to this Latvian, he had made the scientific discovery of a lifetime. He had created a device, a marvelous device, an amazing contraption, the Nemore, a disintegrator. What? Naturally, I'd already said my work was spoiled. But as Mr. Malone reminded me, if Theodore Nemours' word was true. If indeed he had made a machine that was able to disintegrate any object it was aimed toward, to discombobulate, to cast asunder the very molecules and atoms of that object, only to reassemble them elsewhere. Imagine what an awful weapon of mass destruction this could be. What warship could not be disintegrated? What battalion of troops could not be atomized there, only to be reassembled a mile above the Atlantic Ocean? Sploosh! Naturally, I said to Malone I would go there that same morning. And so it was, later on that very day, in the north part of the city, in a luxurious suite of rooms. We made the acquaintance of this Theodore Nemours. We were made to wait in an anteroom as he parleyed with a group of people. I could see the silhouettes of their Astrakhan collars. Russians, I believe, by the sounds of their voices. And then finally, Mr. Nemours himself introduced his swarthy appearance to us. He was not a very prepossessing individual. Short, thick-set, a pale and pasty face, rather similar to an underdone dumpling. And then, upon his upper lip, a few wisps of a lank moustache, which he endeavored to conceal, albeit with indifferent success. A set of pale, wet, slobbering lips. The first thing Nemours asked, "Are we from the British government?" "What? Do I look as though I'm from the British government?" He led us to believe there was an individual there from the Foreign Office that Mr. Mycroft Holmes desired to parley. I'd never heard of him, ladies and gentlemen, never heard of him. "So who were those gentlemen with whom you were just conversing?" I said to Mr. Nemours. "Russians." He was polite enough to confide in me that much. He told me that his device would be available to the government prepared to pay the highest sum of money, a fortune paid for the key locked within his mind. An unscrupulous man, a villainous man, and a genius for all of that. For if you could have seen him, the cranial arch of his skull, what a magnificent mind he possessed, albeit the contents of which put to nefarious ends. Before we went any further, Theodore Nemours attempted to give me some rudimentary lessons in the concept behind this device. I said it was nonsense. How on earth does one simply make an object disappear? "Ah, well," he said, "picture, if you will, any crystals perhaps of salt and of sugar. If you were to place those into a liquid, water, for instance, it would appear to the naked eye, would it not, that they had vanished into thin air. However, nothing more or nothing less than the process of rehydration would bring these crystals once more there before your eyes." "Nonsense," I said. "Why on earth allude to one incredible thing to explain another?" "Perhaps a practical demonstration," he said to me. "Yes," I said, "I demand it." And so he led us across a courtyard to a spacious outhouse. And within, I remember from the ceiling, coiled festoons of copper cabling. And there, not at me, behind you, madam, there, a huge magnet perched atop a pedestal. And over there, a prism of what looked like glass, some 3 feet wide by 1 feet in depth. And then a chair. A chair atop a plinth, a chair attached to which copper wiring, a chair above which suspended a copper cap, looking for all over the world, ladies and gentlemen, like the electrocution chair at Sing Sing. I imagine you, sir, will be familiar with it before your time is done. What? I turned to Professor Nemours. I said, I need a demonstration. I stepped forward with a view to sitting in the chair myself. Malone, to his credit, seized me by the arm. "No, Professor," he said, "mankind can scarce afford to be bereft of your titanic intellect." Ladies and gentlemen, I was forced to agree with him. Sensible young man. And so Malone, the young fellow, seated himself. I saw Theodore Namor pull a lever. I was lost for words. Bewildered, astounded, amazed, discombobulated, ladies and gentlemen. One minute he was there, the next he was gone. Malone had vanished. For 3 minutes or more, I gaped and hemmed and hawed, and Namor looked at me in his odious, self-satisfied fashion. And then once more he pulled the lever up to ratchet number 3, I believe, although I may be mistaken. And then Malone reappeared. His first words being, "Well, blast it all, get on with it." I leapt across to where he was seated. I seized him by the hand. I was so thankful and grateful that he had been restored to me. An indifferent journalist, ladies and gentlemen, but a fine young man when all is said and done. And then Namor turned to me and said, "Well, Professor, perhaps you would now like to become involved, unless you are a coward." "Stand aside, Malone," I said, and I beseated myself where formerly the young friend had been. I swear I could have seen Namor pull a lever, perhaps turn a few buttons, but nothing had happened. And yet the way that Namor looked at me, I swear I could almost see young Malone smirk. And then I felt a sudden breeze playing about my features. I raised my hand to my face, only to find as smooth as a girl's visage, as bare as a baby's derriere, and my lustrous locks had been shorn. "What have you done, Namor?" I said. And immediately I leapt from my chair and I seized the Latvian by the throat, and I dashed him to the ground. If it had not been for Malone to drag me away, I swear, Namor would have been Namor by now. He was visibly shaken, his complexion paler than usual, throwing into sharp relief his warts and his blotches. "It was only a joke," he said, Professor Challenger. "You let me do the body hair operates upon a different frequency to the rest of the body. Restore me to my former splendor," I demanded of him. I reseated myself, and I said, "Namor, unless my beard, my mustachios are not restored, along with my hair, before the next minute has elapsed, then I swear..." "No, my beard, my mustache, my hair." I looked at him. Ladies and gentlemen, I myself was forced to concede the genius that Namor had exhibited. Mediocrity knows nothing higher than itself. Talent instantly recognizes genius. And when I am a genius myself, then I am magnanimous enough to appreciate it in others. I told Malone to keep a steady, watchful eye upon Namor as I paced up and down. Now you are to remember, ladies and gentlemen, as far as I was aware, that Namor had not actually sold his secret yet to any one government. However, he was determined to sell it to the highest bidder. At that point, it would appear to be none other than Russia itself. Think, if you will, this was nothing more than a mere prototype, a toy designed to while away the hours. Think the awful practical application. Once this Namor disintegrator were built upon a large scale, think of the warships that may be forced to disappear. Think of the troops and battalion that could be forced to vanish into thin air. Think. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine, if you will, this wretched contraption placed here and there at strategic points across London. Think of the Thames Valley. Think of this awful ray, this disintegration device, cutting a swathe across the inhabitants. All of those men, women, and children disappeared in a trice. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, who was I to concede victory? Science knows no morrow. Science merely leads knowledge, for good or ill. And Malone was astounded as he saw me reach out to Theodore Namor to pump his hand vigorously. "Congratulations, sir," I said, "although it is regrettable that you have not determined to put the fruits of your mental labor to good usage nonetheless. Nonetheless, the discovery, the genius you have displayed is yours and yours alone to sell. And yet I wonder, before we part ways, may I please be granted one final boon, to inspect this machine once and for all?" "Well," he said, "Professor, of course you may, but the soul is locked away inside my mind, the key that will unleash the magic therein." "I know," I said, "but what a wonderful feat of engineering this is." And so I busied myself walking around, scrutinizing the construction. "Namor, would you mind if I were to sit upon the device?" "None of your tricks, Malone, guard him!" Oh, was it my imagination? Oh, a not unpleasant sensation, it is true, but oh, Namor had failed. He had not insulated his contraption properly. I could feel a trickle of electricity ripple up and down my spine. "Sir," I said to Namor, "you have failed. You have not insulated the disintegrator machine, have you?" "I have," he said, "I have. Well, I am not imagining this trickle, am I?" Oh, he manhandled me from the chair, seated himself where I had been. "Well, there," I said, "do you not feel it?" "I don't feel a thing," he said to me. "Concentrate, man," I said, "concentrate." And as Theodore Namor was endeavoring to feel, but I, Challenger the Supreme, had felt, I sauntered over to the control device, the console. I may have slipped. My fingers perhaps idly may have danced across the levers. But is that my mistake? Is that my error? Surely Theodore Namor ought to have safeguarded their usage more carefully, oughtn't he? Oh! A cry from Malone! Namor! Was Namor, ladies and gentlemen. I gazed across, and all that remained of this maleficent Latvian, an amorphous shimmer, a cloud of so many atoms hovering above. "What have you done, Professor Challenger?" cried Malone. "It's not my fault, is it? But consider, not a bad morning's work. This may have fallen into the hands of the Russians. If not they, think of the damage, the untold havoc wrought by the powers of evil. Such a transaction must be stopped, whatever the cost. I do not know for certain, Which ratchet I ought to push this lever? Number 3, I think, but I was so busy wondering where you had disappeared to, Malone. What if I push the lever now, with a view to bringing Nemo back? What if I were only to make things worse? What then, eh? What then? No, I think, young Malone, we ought to walk away before we wreak more havoc and consternation, even as Theodore Nemo's atoms cascade across the cosmos, tumbling across the universe. With him gone, vanished as it were, disintegrated, the device is useless. His mind alone being the key, the Russians are without their weapon of mass destruction. You, Malone, have your sensational headline story, mysterious disappearance of enigmatic Latvian. And as for me, I have had a mild divertissement for the morning, but come now, Malone, I have already been kept away from my proper work for long enough. Come, you return to the Galette, and I have work to attend to. Yes, never mind all that. Now I must be on my way, ladies and gentlemen. You may recollect my friend Lord Roxton, a literary agent of mine, Doyle, for a scribbler, a writer of penny dreadfuls and lurid shilling shockers. He is adequate, I suppose, recommended to me by an associate of mine, a doctor, a man of medicine, Watson. The Lost World, pterodactyls over London Road. Roxton has invited me to travel all the way up to Scotland, north of the border. His estate, Inverness Shire. He would have me believe that a sighting of a plesiosaur in the Loch Ness. Wonderful, ladies and gentlemen. I will do all that is necessary. Necessary what? To prove or to confound the rumors, be that as it may. And now, ladies and gentlemen, now our time draws to an end, I trust. Your store of ignorance, not as great as it was at the beginning. And until you are lucky enough to make my acquaintance, I leave all of you to think back upon what you have learned tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Cast your minds back. Enjoy a new thrill to the extraordinary escapades of Professor George Edward Challenger. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the show of the same. We return in partnership with NX Publishing in 2 months' time, where you are all invited to witness Sherlock Holmes solve the case of the Crown Diamond. However, for those who cannot wait, join us next Sunday. We invite you all to embark on an adventure in time and space. On the time machine. We are Don't Go Into the Cellar Victorian Theatre with Bite. And you have all been wonderful. Thank you, and until we are destined to meet one another again, I bid you all goodbye.